Hello, everybody. So it is a great day today. I hope you guys are having a great day. So I just want to let you know that this video is going to be a really long one. So if you've seen any of my videos before, they're like less than 10 minutes, but I got a lot to talk about for this. So I just want to let you guys know that this is going to be a longer video, but it's so much to cover. Just to give you some backstory, I watched Elevation Church yesterday, which is one of my favorite churches that I look at. And Pastor Stephen Furtick preached a message about the man that got healed by Jesus that was paralyzed. So just to give you some backstory on it, basically there was a man that was paralyzed, and some men took this man on a mat, and they were trying to get to Jesus, but they couldn't because the crowds were so packed. So they decided to take the man up on the roof, lower the man through the roof, still on the mat, in front of Jesus. And Jesus saw the faith of the men. And because he was so impressed by the faith of the men, he went ahead and he told the paralyzed man that his sins were forgiven. And then after he did that, he also told the man to stand up and walk and take his mat and he healed him. So that's the short version of this. But we're going to break this story all the way down because there's so much that is in this story that after I watched the sermon, I was like, man, I gotta look this up myself because there has to be more. There's a lot of things that are not explained. So I was inspired by his message to dig a little bit deeper today because basically what Stephen Furtick was saying was that, you have to try higher to accomplish things when you feel like things are blocking you. And I absolutely know what that feels like. So that is what the context of the sermon. It was fantastic. It was called Try Harder. So if you have time to watch it, I would definitely watch that. But we're going to go into this and kind of dissect the story because there's a lot of questions in it and there's a lot of answers in it, but it just takes some digging. Okay. So first of all, if you want to get the reference for where this story is, it could be found in Luke chapter 5, starting at verse 17. Matthew also talks about this story, Matthew 9:1, and Mark talks about the story in Mark 2:1. So it's interesting first because it's three different perspectives on the same story. Some of them give more details than others, so you can kind of pick the version that you want to start with. Is perfectly fine. So the main characters in this particular story were a couple people, and I'm not gonna focus too much on the crowd per se, but some of the characters were the Pharisees, the crowd of people, the man on the mat, and the men. So that's really all the main characters of this story. And just like a lot of things in the Bible, it's a very limited amount of information, but here's what we do know based off of the Luke version, which is the version that I'm going to be kind of going through today. So what we do know is that everywhere Jesus went, there was a large crowd that followed him everywhere he went. So what we do know for sure in this story is that word on the street was that Jesus fixed people. He healed people. He did miracles everywhere he went. So the word traveled. Like every time he went somewhere, he was always surrounded by a crowd of people all the time. So that's what we do know. And that is a constant thread. Wherever Jesus goes, people follow him and they want to get healed, or he has a message, or they just want to be in his presence, So the word was definitely out that Jesus was the one to go to for knowledge, for power, for just anything. And that also includes the Pharisees, because the Pharisees also followed him. And they weren't coming to get healed. They were coming to criticize him and make sure that none of his teachings were going against the laws of Moses or making sure he wasn't breaking the Sabbath. Like, they typically weren't there to get healing or anything encouraging. They were really there to kind of check Jesus out, see who he was, and try to understand, was he trying to come over and take over, basically. So also another thing that we know about this story is that the man was paralyzed. Okay. We know that the man was paralyzed, and because he was paralyzed, what we do know is that based off of the story, the man could not get there on his own. Okay. So we talk about, if you read the story, the men carried him on a mat to get him to Jesus that day. So we don't know how he is paralyzed or how long he's paralyzed, but we do know that there's not any way that he could have gotten there without the assistance of these men. Okay, that's something that we know for sure. We already talked about this, but another thing we know is that crowds follow Jesus all the time. And we also just mentioned that haters follow Jesus all the time. That's what we do know, okay? Another thing in this story that we know for sure is that the men first tried to get the man in the crowd or through the crowd to get to Jesus, but the crowd was too large. So what we do know is that when they got there, they saw the crowd and they tried to get through the crowd, but they could not get through the crowd. So that's something that we know for sure also. What we also know for sure is that the man was lowered down through the roof. So he walked out of this story with his mat and he wasn't on his mat. So he came in to meet Jesus one way and he left out a completely different way. He was paralyzed on a mat coming in. And by the time his experience of Jesus ended, he was completely healed and he immediately got up, took his mat with him and left thanking God and being grateful. So that's what we know for sure. He came in one way and he left out another. So keep that in mind too. Also, if you notice something about this story is that Jesus told him first that his sins were forgiven and then he healed his actual sickness. So that's something that we know for sure, which we may talk about a little bit later. And then lastly, something that we know for sure in this story is that the scripture says that Jesus saw their faith, which leads me to the topic today. And the topic of this conversation is, whose faith is it anyway? Okay. So the scripture says that Jesus saw their faith. So who is their faith? Is it the man's faith? Is it the men that carried his faith? Whose faith is it anyway? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So like I mentioned before, the main story, if you read Luke, the version in Luke, you'll see that, to be honest with you, there's a lot more details in this story than in some of the other versions, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. And that's the hardest part for me when I go back and look at all these stories, because God leaves out a lot of details and I'm a detail-oriented person. So I want to talk to you now about all the things that we don't know about this story, okay? And we're going to break these down a little bit at a time. So here we go. Number one thing that we don't know about this story is that, was this planned in advance? Did they already have a decision? So just go with me here. So if everybody knew that Jesus was the man to be healed and word on the street was that he was coming into town, or maybe the word had traveled about other miracles that he did in the past, was this plan, lowering him through the mat, lowering him on the roof, the next time they saw Jesus or heard Jesus was coming, they already had a plan in advance to do this? Or did they just do this on a whim? No idea. I feel like if you think about the story, how did they plan out the logistics of this actual thing? So my number one question that I had was this planned in advance? Did the men and the paralyzed man have a plan just in case Jesus ever came through their street and they had all the stuff ready on deck, like an emergency preparedness kit, that whenever they heard Jesus, they already had the tools and already had everything they needed to get the man out there? No idea. It's definitely mind-boggling for me. Another thing we don't know is, did the men come with more tools? We keep talking about preparation. So this is a struggle for me, because when you think about this, in order for them to get the man, first of all, a mat. So I'm thinking a mattress, and maybe I'm thinking wrong, but I'm thinking a mattress for men carrying this man. They have to have tools of some sort to lower the man down through the roof, right? So do they have ropes? Do they each have backpacks and they're carrying this mat? They had to have some tools. And also to get through the roof, I was reading that it was possible that they could have dug holes in the top of the roof to get him down. But are they digging with their hands? Did they have shovels? Did they have tools? Did they have backpacks and they was carrying the mat? I have no idea, but that's something to think about. And then another question I have is, that we don't know, is how long was this man paralyzed? Was he paralyzed from a recent accident? I was going to say car accident, but they don't have cars then. But was he paralyzed his entire life? Did he recently have some type of accident that caused him to be paralyzed? Is this a childhood thing? What happened? And I don't know. We have no idea. So that's something that we don't know the answer to. also another question I have is, did the men that carried the man, did they know each other? Like, were they high school friends, or was this man just in their neighborhood and the men just noticed that he had been paralyzed? Like, did they have a relationship? Because I'm gonna tell y'all something. Putting a man on a mat and carrying him on a mat, there has to be some type of trust there. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a very big person, but I don't know very many people that I would want to carry me on a mat to take me anywhere. Like, and I don't know. You have to have some trust there. So, did the men and the man already have a relationship before this story? Like, were they friends, or did everybody know this man in the neighborhood? And maybe these men just decided together that one day, if they could help heal this man, they would. Or were they friends? Were they family members? Like, how did that happen? Like, how did that whole conversation go? No idea. Something that we don't know. Another thing is, was this man little? Like, I don't know. Was this a big man? Was it a small man? And were the men big themselves? Like, I think about having 4 men carry a man on a mattress. They had to have some strength to them, right? Because who knows, like, the distance between the man's house once they got him on the mat and actually where Jesus was. Like, and were they strong enough to get him to Jesus? Like, how did they do that? Also, they got this man on the mat on the roof. Like, what is the logistics of that? How strong was this man? Were these men? Was this a little man, like a young dude, where I could see if he was young and, the guys were young, everybody was in their prime, and so they had the ability physically to carry this man. No idea, but it's mind boggling to me. Also, too, did anyone else help them? Like, did anyone else help with the logistics of this? Because it doesn't say, I can imagine that maybe when they got to the house, they mentioned that the house is crowded and they couldn't get through. But did anybody else see? Surely they saw this man on this mat. It's not every day that a man is paralyzed on a mat and 4 men are carrying him, that where people would just casually not see that. So in the crowd, was there anybody that tried to start to push through and help the man get through? Or was there anybody that was there on the way? Because think about it, I'm sure they had to go a distance, right? So did they have other people involved in this process to even get to the house where Jesus was, or the synagogue, or wherever he was? So was it just a 4-man show, or did they have other people helping as well? Because I feel like this was a big task for just 4 men to complete by themselves. Another thing that we don't know the answer to about this story is, had they tried to reach Jesus before today, right? Maybe there was another encounter where Jesus came to this particular area and the men heard about this, and maybe they had tried this before. Maybe they tried this way before, or maybe they tried another way. Maybe instead of a mat, maybe they put him on like I don't know, I want to say like a red wagon, but they didn't have wagons. But maybe they tried to get to Jesus another time and it didn't work. So maybe this actual experience was round 2 of a previous effort that they made. They'll never know. Who knows? Also, another thing that we don't have the answer to is, how far did they travel to arrive to a crowd of people? So that will upset me. And I'm just speaking for myself, but like I said, I can't even, first of all, I can't even fathom carrying anybody for a great distance. My daughter is 6 and I don't like to carry her even like from our driveway to our house. Like, that's a short distance, and she's 6. She still thinks she can be picked up. So I'm thinking, how far did they travel like this? And I don't know if they had like clear a path. Are they walking on like solid ground, or are they going through valleys? And did they have shoes on, and how far? What was the distance between the house where they got the man off of the mat and where Jesus was? Like, I'm sure that was a long way. And then to get all that way, imagine walking 20 miles, not by yourself, carrying someone else, 4 other people, carrying some other person on a mat, and you get there and the actual building is full and it's crowded and nobody is moving out the way for you. Not only that, I mean, what if one of the 4 men are not paying attention in a trip or something? Like, I don't know. We'll never know the answers to any of these questions, but it's just very interesting to me. Okay, so let's talk about the men. Something that we don't know about the men is, how did the men know that they should have taken the man to Jesus? Did they see other miracles that he did, that Jesus did? And maybe they heard Jesus was on his way. And maybe because the word traveled around, maybe the men were the ones that heard about Jesus first. And maybe that is where it came from, for them to go tell the man and go get the man. Or is it possible that the paralyzed man heard about Jesus before? Now, it says that he was paralyzed. So the only way that word would travel is if you were out in those streets, like meeting people, going to the store, going to shopping, and all that stuff. So if the man was paralyzed, unless people are coming to him because he can't do much for himself, unless people are coming to the man and saying, hey, I heard about this man named Jesus, the next time he comes to your city, you got to make sure you go see him. Or did the men hear about Jesus first and they were like, oh my gosh, as soon as we hear about this man, if he ever comes to the town, we're going to go get the paralyzed man. Who knows? We'll never know. Also, how long was Jesus there, right? So in all the different scriptures, I have yet to see a scripture where they're like, Jesus came and talked for 20 minutes. No, he talked for days sometimes. He talked for hours. He talked so long that people needed to eat food afterwards, and they didn't even have food prepared. He talked on boats. He talked on land. He talked forever about all kinds of things. So how long was Jesus there? Was this day 2? And maybe the first day it wasn't as crowded. And so maybe the men saw Jesus on the first day when it wasn't a lot of a crowd. And maybe they went to the man and said, hey, Jesus is here. Let's get our plan together and let's visit him the next day. So on day 2, maybe it still won't be that crowded, and they got there and they were wrong. I don't know. But I do know that Jesus didn't stay places for short periods of time. So if Jesus was there for 3 or 4 days, was he there for 1 day? Like, how long was he there? Because that would be interesting to know. Also, going back to the men, let's say Jesus was there early that morning. Did the men see Jesus and scope out the scene first, and then went back and told the man, hey, we just saw Jesus and let's go pull up that emergency plan that we had and let's go get this thing going? Or did they not see him at all and they just decided on a whim that today was the day we're going to try this out? Like, that's what the question I asked about being prepared. Like, I feel like maybe the men saw Jesus was in the city, so they ran back to go get the man, and then they got the man together. They already had their ropes and all that stuff already packed just in case this day came, and the day finally came, and now they're ready to take the man. No idea. What about this? Now I think about the man. So they don't say much about the man, but did the man ask to be healed? First of all, did he pray? Was he praying that somehow he would get healed? Did he already know about Jesus? And did he secretly pray, like, dear God, the next time Jesus comes to my city, can I please get the opportunity to meet him? Or was the man just asking to be healed? Was he asking to be healed a certain way? Was he asking for doctors to come up with a solution to heal him from being paralyzed? Had he already been to a lot of doctors already and nobody could heal him? Or did he know about Jesus and heard about all the miracles? And was he praying to God like, please, 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 let me have a miracle? No idea. We don't know. Also, a little bit more about this. How did the man feel about this genius plan? We thought we always ask God to answer our prayers and do stuff for us. But I'll be honest with you. If I ask God to heal me, please heal me from my sickness. Please heal me from my sickness. Please heal me from whatever I'm going through. If I was praying for that, and these men, which we're going to say were like my cousins or something, somebody that I trust, if these men came up to me and was like, hey, Shardé, I know you've been praying for this. I got a solution. What we're going to do is we're going to put you on a mattress, and me and these other 3 cousins, all 4 of us are going to pick you up, and we're going to take you all the way to Jesus so he can heal you. I don't know if I would be like, yes, let's go, let's do it. Would you want to do that? Is there anybody that you trust to carry you on a mattress outside for God knows how long and all the way to Jesus? I don't know. Was the man so desperate that he was willing to do anything, even if it sounded crazy? Maybe. I have no idea. And I bet that would determine maybe like all the other attempts that he tried before that didn't work, and maybe how long he's been paralyzed. Because I'll be honest with you, if they had came to me with this project, I would have been like, listen, y'all, listen, fam, I love y'all. We got the same, we got the same granny, but I don't see myself letting y'all walk me all the way down 4 or 5 miles on a mattress to get healed. I appreciate y'all. I love the creativity and the thought process, but I really can't see myself getting on this mat. I just don't see it. I love y'all, but I'm out. Thank you, but no thanks. I don't know if I would want that, and that goes back to how it was the man praying that he got healed. Because chances are, if he think like me, I'm praying that a doctor will just knock on my door one day, have some secret cure in a tablet form, like a chewable tablet, because I don't really like to swallow medicine. So I'm thinking that a doctor is making a chewable, paralyzed free pill that I can take so that I can be healed and be done with it. So it's interesting to see, like, how did they come up with this? And was the man down for this plan? I don't know. We'll never know. Then also, going back to the men, have the men done this before? Like, are they in construction? Because even if I had an idea about getting something accomplished, I can't say that putting a man through the roof would be my first idea. So are these men in construction? Do they understand the ceiling tiles and the roof? And like, do they have the logistical capacity? Do they have the background to successfully pull this mission off? Because that might help me buy into this story. If all my cousins build houses for a living, cool. I might trust it a little bit. But if these cousins all work at Target and they have this idea to put me through the roof, I don't know if I'm gonna go for it. And I would just be honest with you. I don't know if that math is not mathing for me. I don't know. But maybe if they have done this before, or maybe they have really been planning this secretly behind the man's back, and maybe they already had all this scoped out and planned, because that's the only way I could think that this will make sense. I don't know. Another thing we don't know is how did they get to the roof, right? So this goes back to my theory that I have a feeling that the men either saw Jesus first at this place and then went back and told the man, because I feel like the only way they could get them up to the roof is if they scoped out the landscape first, right? So in my mind, maybe they saw Jesus first. They did a little 360 or over the house or the synagogue, saw the steps, and said, cool. If we can't get him through the crowd, when we get back, if this crowd is still here, when we get back, we're going to go up them steps, because I haven't seen anybody go up the steps. So maybe the men scoped out the place first, saw the stairs, went back, told the men, because they had scoped the scene out, they already knew they needed a rope, they needed shovels, like they already had all that together. So they were prepared to get him where he needed to go. I don't know. What about this? Why didn't the crowd make any space for him? Because I feel like if they had seen this man, they would have been more inclined to like give him some space to get in to see Jesus. But when we talk about the crowd, I'm kind of surprised, but not surprised that the crowd didn't make way for this man, because a lot of times when we want to get healed or something, we only think about ourselves and problems that we have. So Jesus is very popular. So I bet because this crowd was so long and so big, everybody was like, nah, fam, I know you're paralyzed. I feel bad for your cousin on this mat, but I need to be healed too. I have problems too. And I got here early to get in this spot, and I'm not scooting over for you. That's just what it is. I know it sounds crazy, but I believe that sometimes people act that way. And I myself am included in that too. What other questions did I have about this story? So many questions. So many questions. Oh, how far did they travel? I don't know if we talked about that, but was the man where the man was it a close distance? And that's why he agreed to get on this mat? Like, maybe the paralyzed man's house was like 2 blocks from the synagogue. And so the mattress travel idea wasn't as crazy because it didn't have to go far, or was it like miles and miles away? And the man was like, listen, I'm so desperate for this that I'll do whatever it takes. I don't know. We'll never know. So yeah, these are just some questions that I had about this story. And what the thing about it is you'll never know any of the answers to these questions, but it's just something interesting to think about. And also I think about too, like, why were all these details left out of this story? Why do you think God didn't give us any of these questions? That was literally, y'all, like 15 to 20 questions about things that we don't know, right? So why did God not give us any of this stuff? I don't know. Maybe because he didn't want people to be so consumed about the logistics and just be thankful that it happened for the man. I don't know. So now that we talked about all the things we know and things we don't know, what I wanted to pull out lastly was, what does this story require? So it required a lot. Okay. So it requires a couple things that I want to go over with you to maybe for you to consider whenever things feel like, it's just impossible. So one of the things that this story required, one of the elements that it required was trust, right? The man had to trust that Jesus was the right person to heal this man. The men had to trust that they could do whatever it took to get the man to Jesus. The man had to trust the men. What if they got all the way to getting him to Jesus and they took a wrong turn? Or what if one of the men was kind of wobbly and not very secure and kind of clumsy? It's 4 men. What if one of the 4 is like really clumsy, he never pays attention to stuff, and he's tripping over rocks and stuff? That ride, y'all, had to be bumpy, okay? So there had to be a level of trust there. Did he know the men? Were they complete strangers? We don't know. So there's a lot of trust that had to be involved here. And also, the man had to truly trust that the men had his best interest at heart. And also, he had to trust that God was the person to heal him. So trust was a big thing in this story. Another thing was determination. They all had to decide at some point. I don't know if they had a meeting about it or if they got there and they just looked at him and was like, yo, we're not leaving. We don't walk this far. We're not stopping here. But I feel like they had to have some determination that no matter what it took, we're going to get this man through this roof. I don't care what it takes. So determination was a big, big factor that this story required. Also, was this story to the men and to the paralyzed man, another element that I noticed is that it was worth the risk. So even though it sounds crazy to everybody and the plan seemed a little outlandish, it looks like the man was so desperate to be healed and the men were so desperate to get the man to Jesus that it was worth the risk for them. Because he could have slid off of that mat, off of that roof, even before they put him down in there through the roof. He could have fell. Jesus could have moved to another location while they was carrying him. Jesus could have said, no, I don't want to do this. They could have dropped him wrong. Anything could happen in this story. So there were a lot of risk involved, but obviously whatever the risks were, they were worth it to all parties involved. Everybody was down for this idea, even though it sounded crazy. Also, preparation is another element that this story required. So I say preparation because they had to have the tools, right? Because even if they were lowering the man on the roof, they had to have some type of tools to get through the roof. I mean, I don't know if they used their hands or what. They had to have tools to get up on the roof and to lower him down, right? And also, I say preparation too when it comes to logistics. So if you read the story, the way they lowered this man, it was the exact spot where Jesus was. So they lowered him exactly in front of Jesus in this story, not in the back. They didn't land on Jesus. It didn't land on some kid. Like, they had to actually lower him exactly in front of Jesus, which is crazy. How did they logistically pull that off? Because Jesus could have moved. He could have moved to the left or moved to the right, or something could have been happening in the back of the room. But there had to be some preparation for them to even know exactly where to drop him. So preparation was another element in this story that I thought was interesting. Also, I would say that faith is another element in this story because somebody, I don't know who, either the man or the men or all of them together, but they knew that Jesus was the right person to solve this man's problem, right? They had trust that no matter what, if they could just get to him, that all would be fixed. And so that's definitely a level of faith for sure. Also another element in this story is support. So we talk about the man being paralyzed. So there's no way he could have got there by himself. So he had a team of people, which were these men, who were willing to support him and help him get to his next, to get to be healed, to get to his destination. So support was another element in this story that I thought was interesting. Also creativity. So, what do you do when things look like you can't finish them? Well, sometimes you have to be creative. Even with the story, like even with the man's willingness to comply with this outlandish idea, they had to be creative. They had to be creative on how they got him there because he couldn't walk. Okay, so he was paralyzed. So they had to come up with a way to get him to Jesus. That's number one. So they decided to use his sleeping mat, which I think is a mattress. I'm not really sure. So there had to be some creativity on their part on how to get him there. And then when they got there, they had this massive crowd. So there had to be some creativity on how to get him down in that room. Because again, the crowd was not letting them go through easily. So it definitely required some creativity. Then also another element in this story is visibility. So we don't know the relationship between the men and the paralyzed man. But do you see other people in need? When you see problems, are you quick to have a solution? So we don't know if they were friends. Maybe this man has been paralyzed all his life, and maybe these other men were just in the neighborhood. And maybe they decided to themselves, man, I really wish this guy was able to walk. I really wish he could get out and do stuff. So maybe these men were able to visibly see this man in need. And maybe they decided that whenever Jesus came, they would be the ones to help him. We don't know. But visibility is also a very big element in here because do you see other people's needs that they have? Or are you too busy trying to make sure that you're in the front of that crowd getting healed yourself? Something to think about. And then awareness. Awareness was another element in this story because there's a lot of story and history on houses and how they were made. So it could be that this house was made like typical houses back then, and they had steps on the side, staircases on the side of the roof that got them up through the roof. So that's why I say I wonder if the men scoped the house out or scoped the area out and they saw the steps, and they saw that as an opportunity to get him up through the roof. We don't know. And then we talked about the logistics too. Like I said earlier, just being able to actually set him down right in front of Jesus was pretty remarkable. So how did all that happen? So we talked a lot today about this story, and I told you that my topic for this was whose faith is it anyway? And while a lot of people say that Jesus healed this man because he saw the faith of the friends, I am of the opinion that whose faith is it anyway that got this miracle? Everybody's faith. It was the man's faith to get on this well, she didn't hop, but it was this man's choice to have the faith to let these men carry him to be healed. It was the men's faith to do all these crazy things to make sure that he got down on that roof. So I think everybody's faith is what healed this man. So if you haven't read the story, I encourage you to read it. Think about all the things that I brought up and always, try to dig a little bit deeper as you start reading these stories. And maybe some of these elements will help you when you have an obstacle that you feel like you can't accomplish.